everyone, and welcome to the channel. My name is Infantry Pulse, and today we'll be going over the top 5 free-to-play friendly Aether Raids Offense units. Now we'll just be taking a look at these units today as they perform in the Astra season. They can perform just as well in the Light season, but pretty much any unit you have built up can perform pretty well in Light season, just because the mythics in that season that you get for free just by playing the game are actually quite good at supporting any kind of tank or any kind of Gale Forcer or any kind of other kind of offense unit that you might have. We'll just be taking a look at one build per unit today. There are lots of different ways to build these units, and they're actually quite versatile. So if you have a different build that you like to use, post it down below in the comments. Without further ado, let's take a look at our first unit.
I was making a run for it when we ran into Prince Marth. I figured he could use the help, so I stuck around.
So coming in at number 5 is actually one of the units that I personally like to use, and that is Spendthrift Norn. So Norn, you can actually use her with her default guard bow, but if you have Spendthrift bow, it is definitely the superior option. Spendthrift bow is an awesome unit that both boosts Norn's offensive power by giving her +7 attack, and also decreases your opponent's attack power, giving them -7 attack. Now the downside is you do have our special reset after every combat, so you want to run a 2-turn cooldown special, something like Noontime for healing, or Ruptured Sky, or Moonbow for damage. Close Foil is the better option, in my opinion, in almost all cases over Close Counter, just because dragons are not super common. The only ones you'll really ever see are Duma, or if you're in Light Season, Dark Season, then you'll see Sothis. But otherwise, you'll just want that extra attack and defense whenever you face a physical threat. It's actually quite useful. Null Follow-Up is an incredible skill. It's actually one of the best skills you can use on a tank because it shuts down units that rely on their tomes or, their weapons to provide follow-ups. Things like Bramimond in Dark Season is a great example. Also, impact skills tend to stop units in their tracks. Think about Eliwood, for example. Eliwood's his Blazing Durandal Refine actually it has an impact skill built into it. Speaking of Eliwood, this also has Pulse Smoke on it, and Pulse Smoke is actually a soft counter to Eliwood, stopping him from Gale Forcing, which is really nice. A lot of times you'll actually see Eliwood come down and run the lunge build, so he'll swap places with your tank and actually pull your tank closer into the enemy team. If Norn doesn't just straight up, kill him. And that can actually be good for Norn. That's why she runs things like Speed Res Solo, and that kind of stuff. So she's really building up her speed here as much as possible. And the reason why you want to build up speed as opposed to any of her other stats is because in Astra Season you'll be facing a lot of Thrasier. And Thrasier relies on speed in order to do her maximum amount of damage. If Thrasier doesn't double, then she actually doesn't get off a lot of her damage. So this stops that kind of Thrasier speed build in its tracks, and also hits it back pretty hard usually. So I actually use Norn in Light Season a lot. I think she's a really great unit. She does require obviously some premium fodder to get up there, but if you do invest in her like this, you'll be very happy with the results.
I'm certain that you've chosen the path of peace.
The next unit we have is Male Corrin. So Male Corrin is probably the best support unit in the game. His Yato Refine gives your allies just a ton of extra stats. You can also, with the ally support being 2 steps away from them, also gives them another bonus +1 to all of their stats. So if you have the S-level partner support there. So with this build, I've actually given him Life and Death 4, but you can instead give him Fury 3 or Fury 4. The point of that is you're just trying to soak away the Bright Shrine, the Dark Shrine, any kind of chill, attack, speed, whatever you're looking for there. That's what this build is designed to do. If you build Fury, you can try to soak even more of those things away. I've got a Link skill on him. I prefer Swap in terms of positional assists. Shove is also great. Smite is also great to get positional assists down. Reposition can work. All these things are great. You just want some kind of positional assist and a link skill to give whatever unit you're supporting the proper buffs. I have double distant guard here, but you could easily run any kind of drive. So this build can actually be made with relatively low investment if you want. Just swapping out Life and Death 4 for something like Fury 3, and then swapping out the distant guards. You can even keep the distant guard seal, but swapping out that distant guard in the C slot for something like drive res, drive speed, drive attack, drive defense, whatever you want in there. I run a low cooldown special on him just because he's not going to see a lot of combat. So if he does, he wants to be able to pop off that that special pretty quickly here. So Moonbow is a good option for him. If you want to really hyper invest, you could also go something like Ruptured Sky. Don't know that that's super necessary. And this build is actually shown without Dragon Flowers. It can work just as well without Dragon Flowers here. But if you do need to soak more of those structures, if you're running a Fury 4 build, you can obviously throw some more Dragon Flowers on him and have him be an even better soaker for your support unit to make sure that your tank, your offense unit, whatever kind of thing you're using here, actually has their max stats at all times.
If we do our best, good things will come of it. And then, even better things after that.
Next up, we have another support unit in the form of Tethys. So Tethys is great because she has pretty high res, and also she's a dancer, right? So you run Tamari Dagger on here that you can actually get from the Heroic Grails shop from New Year's Air. And Tamari debuffs attack and speed of your opponent as long as they're adjacent to an ally and have a couple less res than the unit that has Tamari. So right now I have Tamari and Sabotage Defense on her. That means that any units that are standing adjacent to each other on your opponent's team, they're going to get -5 attack, -5 speed, and -7 defense. So that's quite a bit of debuff. This can work well to support a broadly fan Vantage user like Soth. It can also just work well generally to support your tank, especially a tank that hits defense. You can swap out Sabotage Defense for Sabotage Res if you're running a unit that hits Res, something like a Tome or a Dragon. But I would say that this build itself is actually quite good at supporting your units. I run Iceberg on her as opposed to a lower cooldown special, just because her attack is pretty low after the Fort Defense Res. And that could, if you don't have Fort Defense Res fodder, that could always be just Fort Resistance. But I run Iceberg on her to make sure that if she does end up seeing combat for whatever reason, she has the chance to at least do some damage, because probably she'll be doing 0 × 2 with her attack stat most of the time if you need her to combat. So, Glimmer won't do anything at all. Moonbow will maybe do something, but I would say that Iceberg is the way to go here, because that's quite a bit of extra damage, 25 extra damage when all is said and done. So Tethys is great to debuff your opponent's units, to support broadly fan users, or just to support a tank that needs to make sure that their opponent's attack stat aren't going to blow them up.
Bern is the mightiest nation in the land. For us to lose is unthinkable.
Coming in at number 2, we have Brunya. So Brunya is actually one of my favorite units. She's actually my go-to tank for the Astra season, and this is actually the exact build that I use on her personally. So we've given her plus speed with the trait fruits. She has steady posture 3 in her A slot. You could use close counter, close foil if you prefer that strategy. The thing is that Brunya gets pretty tanky overall, and so even if melee units are hitting her, she's probably not taking a whole ton of damage. Most real threats you see in AR, with the exception of things like Eliwood, are going to be ranged units. They're not going to be melee units. And so the kind of threats that you would see, something like a Duma that you could poke down, that would be the biggest threat, I think, to Brunya would be a Bold Fighter Duma, but Duma doesn't have very much movement range, so you can definitely play around that. Or you can use close counter if you really think it's a big deal. But I think steady posture is great because it gives her that extra speed and defense in the enemy phase, and that helps her face the biggest threat in Anima Season, which is Thrasier. So this Brunya usually doesn't kill Thrasier in retaliation, but will prevent Thrasier from doubling, and will also take very little damage. With Pulse Smoke there, she's an excellent counter to infantry pulse teams. She also stops things like Elliewood and stops Thrasier from charging up her Moonbow too much with that Flashing Blade build. But overall, her ability to use her tome to negate debuffs on her and actually make her stronger when she does have debuffs is entirely invaluable. Debuffs are super common in any kind of Aether Raids defense strategy just because the shrine structures exist. You also have things like chills being seen quite a bit on Aether Raids defense. So what you want, instead of with usual tanks, you want a support unit that can soak chills. Bria actually wants to take on all the chills herself. So she is a great unit in the fact that she does not need the kind of support that other units might need to be really successful. She also hits res. She gets very high stats when all is said and done. Her tome giving her the +4 stats, then speed res solo and steady posture giving her even more stats after that. It just makes her a really great tank. So now we're just going to kind of rapid fire through a couple honorable mentions. These are units that are actually quite good, but maybe just not good enough to make the top 5 here today. So the first one is going to be Resplendent Sophia. So Sophia has a Raven Tome effect, which means she's effective against both green and colorless units. Makes her a good counter to a lot of the mythic units that you commonly see on defense. Right here I have her build up for raw defense in terms of using quicker posts and boosting up her res, but you could also build her for speed to kind of boost her middling speed stat and make her work that way as more of a null follow-up tank in the same vein as Bria. Next up, we have Navarre, and Navarre is actually one of the best Gale Force users we have, just because his ability to pre-charge is so great. So on turn 1, he gets effectively -3 cooldown from his Scarlet Sword, so that means he has a 2-turn Gale Force ready to go, which means he only has to attack once if he gets a Flashing Blade proc to then get that Gale Force off. That kind of mitigates the problem that some Gale Force units have of having too high attack and killing the enemy unit. So Navarre actually does quite well as a Gale Force follow-up unit using Wings of Mercy. Finally, we have Tharja. So Tharja is just an example here of a Blade Tome Vantage user. There are lots of different Blade Tome Vantage users, but I think Tharja probably does it the best out of all of them. You can use something like Moonbow or Ruptured Sky on her in the special. I actually prefer to run Miracle and Heavy Blade. That way she's a little bit more survivable and will tank hits just a little bit more if something actually doesn't die to one of her attacks. She can actually survive with Miracle and then still pop off and destroy the entire enemy team. You just gotta watch out for panic manners when you use something like this Tharja.
I love the sight of blood. I don't expect filthy vermin like you to understand that.
And that brings us to our number 1 unit for Aether Raids Offense as a free-to-play player, and that is going to be Crania. Now, Crania is easily one of the best Vantage units in the game because she does not herself have to get down to low HP, but just has to make the opponent get down to low HP. Now, things like Healing Tower can counter her pretty well. You also have to look out for the Myogi Daggers and users of Hardy Bearing. But if you can take out your opponent's Hardy Bearing user and make sure that their Healing Tower isn't going to overcome the damage that you have from your Bolt Tower, then you can actually use Crania to great effect. Now I have Attack Defense Solo onto her Seal slot. You can easily run another Savage Blow just to make sure that your opponent is staying under the right amount of health. I personally run Ruptured Sky Special Spiral on my Crania, but you can also run things like Disarm Trap or Null Sea Disrupt that make her a really great unit. The best thing that you can do to pair with her is actually using Brave Hector. So Brave Hector is essentially a walking bolt tower and allows you to deal even more damage into a selected area of space. So you can hit units that maybe your bolt tower wouldn't normally hit. One of the things you can do is actually, if your bolt tower hits a section of the units and your Halloween Hector can attack can use his duo skill to poke down the remainder of the units, then instead of attacking with Crania and taking out a unit, what you can do is just use Crania to attack your opponent's Healing Tower. So that way, as long as they're not using a super strong Hardy Bearing user or a very strong Myogi Dagger, then she'll just clean sweep the team after that, because Crania has very high attack capabilities when you use things like Close Foil and Attack Defense Solo. That being said, you can also run close counter to make sure that you can counter against dragons, things of that nature. There are lots of different builds that you can do with her. This is just personally my favorite build, and I think of the Vantage users, Kranya is the easiest to use and definitely makes her the best free-to-play offense user in the game. And that is the video. So if you liked it, make sure to leave the video a like, give the channel a subscribe over here. There's also a brand new Discord channel, so if you need a place to get advice for Aether Raids Offense or Aether Raids Defense builds, or if you just want a place to just chat about Fire Emblem Heroes, there's a lot of really cool people there. So there's a link in the description, hit that up. And with all that being said, thanks you guys for watching, and I'll see you later.